It's been years since the Ferris wheel at Ravenwood Carnival turned, but the laughter hasn't stopped. You can hear it at night, faint and distant, unless you get too close. Then it's deafening. When I first heard about Ravenwood Carnival, I thought it was just another urban legend, a place where people disappeared, their laughter echoing long after they were gone. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones, warning curious visitors to stay far away. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I arrived on a crisp autumn evening, the kind where the air carries a bite. The carnival grounds were exactly as I'd imagined, desolate and overgrown. Rusting rides stood frozen in time. Their vibrant colors faded into muted browns and grays. The Ferris wheel loomed above it all, its skeletal frame creaking in the wind. The first oddity was the silence. Despite the wind, not a single leaf rustled. It was the kind of quiet that wraps itself around you, thick and unnatural. Then, just as I stepped onto the grounds, I heard it. Laughter. It wasn't cheerful, though it tried to be. The sound was distorted, like an old record spinning just a little too slow. It came from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. My heart pounded, but I pressed on, clutching my flashlight like it could protect me. I wandered through the remnants of the carnival, the laughter growing louder with each step. A funhouse caught my eye, its once whimsical facade now peeling and decayed. The laughter seemed to call me toward it, pulling me in like a siren's song. Against every instinct, I entered. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, filled with the faint scent of rot. Mirrors lined the walls, most of them cracked and clouded with age. My reflection stared back at me from every angle, distorted and fragmented. But as I moved, I noticed something horrifying. One of the reflections didn't follow. It was a man dressed as an old-fashioned clown, his makeup smeared and eyes impossibly dark. He stood perfectly still in the mirror, his head tilted as if he were studying me. My chest tightened as I spun around, but the room behind me was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, he was gone. I stumbled out of the funhouse, gasping for air. The laughter was everywhere now, deafening and relentless. I ran toward the Ferris wheel, the towering centerpiece of the carnival. As I neared, I saw something moving in its shadow. Figures, dozens of them, their outlines faint and flickering like static on an old TV. They turned toward me in unison, their faces were blank, featureless masks of pale flesh. And yet, I could feel their eyes, their gazes piercing through me. "Join us," a voice whispered, though no lips moved. The figures began to advance, their movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my flashlight flickering wildly. The laughter reached a crescendo, overlapping screams and cries of terror, as if the carnival itself were alive, feeding on the fear of those who wandered in. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to my car, only that the laughter followed me the entire way. Even now, I hear it sometimes, faint and distant in the dead of night. The carnival may be abandoned, but it's far from empty, and if you hear the laughter, it might already be too late. The first time I heard about the abandoned subway station, I laughed it off as just another urban legend. By the time I stood in its depths, staring at claw marks on the tunnel walls, I wasn't laughing anymore. I've always had a fascination with the unexplained. When I read about the Pine subway station, an unfinished metro project buried beneath the city that had supposedly claimed the lives of construction workers in the 50s, I couldn't resist investigating. Locals claimed people who wandered down there vanished without a trace, their screams echoing through the empty tunnels long after they were gone. The entrance was sealed decades ago, but there were rumors of an access point through an old maintenance hatch. Armed with a flashlight, my phone, and a recorder, I made my way to the rusted, graffiti-covered hatch late one evening. The city above bustled with life, but down there, everything was silent, suffocatingly so. As I descended the narrow, crumbling staircase, the air grew colder, damp, and thick with a metallic tang. My flashlight flickered, the beam slicing through the pitch-black void. The tunnel stretched endlessly in both directions, its walls lined with faded posters and rusting pipes. I began to walk, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud. The station's floor was littered with debris, broken tiles, rusted tools, and, oddly, shoes. Single mismatched shoes scattered along the ground, as though their owners had walked out of them, or been dragged. About 100 yards in, I noticed something strange. The shadows cast by my flashlight didn't seem to align with the objects around me. A pipe to my left stretched a shadow much farther than it should have. A pile of debris seemed to shift in the corner of my eye. I chalked it up to nerves, at first. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky but firm. It bounced back to me, distorted and warped. Then I heard it. A faint scuffling sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It was distant at first, but it grew louder, closer. I swung my flashlight in every direction, but the beam seemed to shrink, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. I froze as the sound stopped, just behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the shadow of a figure, unnaturally tall and thin, stretched impossibly long across the tunnel wall. I turned again, searching for the source, but the tunnel was empty. My breath came in shallow gasps as the shadow began to move, crawling along the wall toward me. "No," I whispered, stumbling backward. The shadow peeled itself off the wall, its form solidifying into a hunched, grotesque figure with limbs that bent in unnatural directions. Its head twisted toward me, and though it had no eyes, I felt its gaze boring into me. I ran. My footsteps echoed wildly, the sound of something wet and heavy slapping the ground behind me. My flashlight flickered again, threatening to die as the air grew colder with every step. The tunnel felt endless, stretching farther the harder I ran. Then I tripped. My flashlight clattered across the ground, its beam illuminating a mass of claw marks etched deep into the wall beside me. Beneath the scratches, written in what looked like dried blood, were the words, "It watches, it waits, it takes." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the flashlight, and bolted toward the faint outline of the maintenance hatch. I didn't dare look back, but I felt it. The heavy, suffocating presence just behind me. When I finally reached the hatch, I slammed it shut, the sound echoing through the night. I collapsed onto the street, trembling and gasping for air. I never went back. But, the nightmares never left. I still hear that wet, dragging sound in the quiet moments before sleep. And sometimes, in the corner of my room, I see shadows that don't belong, stretching toward me. Some tunnels should stay sealed forever. They warned me not to follow the whispers, but curiosity has always been stronger than fear. If I'd known what waited in the shadows of those woods, I would have turned back that first night, or maybe I wouldn't have gone at all. I first heard the whispers when I moved into the cabin on the edge of Whispering Woods. The locals in town had been kind enough, but their smiles always faltered when I mentioned where I'd be staying. "You're braver than most," one man said quietly, but when I pressed him for details, he only shook his head and muttered something about the woods being wrong. I didn't believe in ghost stories or curses, so I ignored the warnings. The cabin was perfect for what I needed: isolation. Writing had become nearly impossible in the noise of the city, and the stillness of the forest was exactly what I craved. The first night, I barely noticed the sound, a faint murmuring, that I assumed was the wind or the distant rustling of leaves. But as the nights wore on, the whispers grew clearer. At first I couldn't make out the words, just soft, rhythmic voices floating on the breeze. They always started at dusk and stopped at dawn. By the third night, I knew it wasn't the wind. The voices seemed to circle the cabin, growing louder when I stood near the windows. One night I left the porch light off and sat in the dark, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever, or whatever, was out there. But all I saw were the trees swaying gently, bathed in pale moonlight. Still, the whispers continued, now accompanied by faint laughter, the kind that makes your skin crawl. I told myself it was just my imagination, but curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to know. On the fifth night, armed with a flashlight and a heavy walking stick, I decided to follow the whispers into the woods. The sound seemed to pull me in, guiding me deeper with every step. The air grew colder the farther I went, and the trees seemed impossibly tall, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers overhead. "Is someone out there?" I called, my voice trembling. The whispers stopped. For a moment, the silence was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, a single voice broke the stillness, soft and clear, a woman's voice. "Help us." My flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams across the trees. The voice repeated, closer this time. "Help us." I should have turned back, but I didn't. The voice sounded so desperate, so human. I stumbled forward, the ground soft and uneven beneath my feet. That's when I saw them. Figures stood among the trees, just barely visible in the faint light. At first, I thought they were people, but they didn't move like people. Their limbs were too long, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. They stood in absolute stillness, their hollow eyes reflecting the light like glass. One of them stepped forward, its movements jerky and disjointed. "Help us," it whispered again, but the voice was wrong, layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. I ran. The forest seemed endless as I sprinted back toward the cabin, the whispers now a deafening chorus behind me. I didn't stop until I reached the front door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving me in suffocating silence. The next morning, I packed my things and left. When I reached the town, I tried to tell someone what I'd seen, but they just shook their heads and muttered about the woods being wrong. One old man finally spoke up. "You shouldn't have gone in," he said. "The ones who whisper, they're not people anymore. They haven't been for a long time." I sold the cabin and never went back, but the whispers stayed with me. Late at night, when the world is quiet, I still hear them, faint and pleading, "Help us." Some places aren't meant to be understood. Whispering Woods is one of them.